Wonderful. Welcome to our SILS virtual career treks for the fall of 2021. Tonight, we're going to be talking about data and databases. So thank you for joining us. My name is Lori Haight, and I serve as the Career Services Coordinator. And for those of you who'd like, we can access the panelists in a number of ways. You can chat to everyone. You can chat to me directly, and I'm happy to read off your question, or you're welcome to raise your hand and unmute. I have a few questions to get us warmed up, but please be thinking of your questions as we go. So first of all, to our panelists, thank you very much for joining us. I know it's wonderful for you to give your time and talent back to SILS students, and we really appreciate that. So to get started, I would like you to do a brief introduction, including what was your path to working with data and databases? And we're going to start first with Sandeep.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Sandeep Aula, and at present I'm working as a research scientist at Amazon. And I got both my PhD and my master's at SILS in information science. I think my first sort of like introduction with large amounts of data, I believe, was in my master's. There was this course that Jaime Arguello, who teaches information retrieval, so he taught this course in it's called experimental IR. I believe like Mary also took the course with me, and that was my first introduction to working on clusters and realizing that simple queries don't work on large amounts of data, and that was my introduction. And from there on, whenever I did internships, and even in my job right now, I work with pretty large amounts of data. So that is one side. But along with that, during my PhD, I've also done quite a bit of mixed methods research, where you have to also look at a small amount of data, where, for example, when you're interviewing people, or when you are conducting some kind of very psychology sort of experiments. And so I've kind of had this experience with both large and small amounts of data, and understood, and I think I have a reasonable understanding now in terms of what sort of inferences that we can make with these different types of data.
Thank you. Mary, can you go next?
Sure. So my name is Mary Gillen. I'm currently a high-touch operations manager at Cisco Systems here in RTP. And my sort of interest in big data and data governance started before SILS. I was working in public relations at a nonprofit, managing really big sets of data for all of our media mentions, and came to really enjoy that more so than the actual journalism PR part of the job. And so I decided to pursue that path as my career and went to SILS. And just like Sandeep, I took pretty much all of Jaime's courses and really fell in love with everything that we were learning. I thought it was super interesting, and the potential of it was really big. So I did a big focus on big data analytics, and that took me to Cisco, where it's not the only thing I do, but it's a pretty big part of my role. And I still really enjoy it to this day. So.
Thank you. John Mark, would you like to go next?
Well, I am the last one, so yes. My name is John Mark Bojansky, and my interaction with data didn't really start until after I finished at SILS. Probably one of the only people to graduate with an LS degree and never have worked in the library, I wasn't able to find a position in RTP, and so I sort of switched gears and looked for data analyst positions and became an analyst and a business intelligence engineer at a small consulting company in Chapel Hill. And we weren't big data, we were more like medium data, working with small and mid-sized companies on their business questions and metrics and reporting. So I worked there for about 5 years, had a short stint at UNC Health, and now I'm also at Cisco Systems in the data privacy operations. And I don't work currently with data a whole lot, but I will have an opportunity to create new reports and metrics for our team, probably starting in the new year.
Thank you. So we're going to continue with the line of questioning. Our next question will be, what was one of the most helpful parts of your graduate experience? Was it a certain class or a certain experience outside of the classroom? And while we're doing this, I'd love to have everybody answer every question, but we don't have to. So I'm going to let you choose who goes first or continues.
I can go first. I had concentrated on health information technology through CHIP when I was at SILS. It was still a fairly new program, not as fleshed out as it is now, but a lot of the classes I had were technical in nature. So I had the Introduction to Databases class with Joan Boone, and that was fantastic. First introduction to SQL. And that's really been my favorite part of working with databases, is writing all these really complex queries to get at the answer that the business people want to know. And then the second thing that I felt was really helpful was the community workshop series, which SILS students ran at that point. I don't know if they still do, probably. All right, Lori says yes. Teaching classes at local public libraries to people who are not technologically literate. So how to use a mouse, how to use a keyboard, how to use very simple software programs like Microsoft Word, and having that personal connection, being able to describe complex technical topics to people who don't have a background in that, was really helpful for the business intelligence side, because that's the intersection of highly technical knowledge, business understanding, and project management. And being able to communicate from one side of that to the other two, and having to do it for all the different combinations, is really nice to have background in technical communication. And that's something I gained out of the workshop series.
I'll second that. Actually, a lot of my job is interfacing between our technical engineers at Cisco and our customer, including like C-level execs and those guys who may not have the technical understanding of everything that we're doing. And so I worked at the help desk at SILS in the IT department for my 2 years while I was there. And like John said, critical to learning how to communicate to people in a way that takes complex information and distills it down to like really basic fundamentals that everyone can understand. So that was just one of the key things I think that really benefited me when I went to go look for jobs after SILS.
So for me, it was a very, very different experience, because when I started out, I think I was looking at the applications of data, getting it and working on it purely from a very technical perspective. I never really cared from a very user-centered, the user side. And that sort of changed after I began my PhD, when so the lab that I was in was very centered on understanding users, and that really changed. And especially towards the end, I was working with reference librarians, and that made me appreciate in terms of the interpersonal communication that people have in information centers, and what does that mean for their own belonging over there. So I've had like a very weird trajectory where I did not really care for the end user. And then slowly, I came to the point where I really started seeing things from their side. So yeah, SILS actually has been pretty great in terms of like giving me a very smooth trajectory in that sense.
That's great to hear. So the flip side of that coin, what is one thing that now looking back, you would have done differently in graduate school?
I probably should have gotten an IS degree. I only worked in libraries when I was, in school. I worked at HSL, and then I worked at or the Health Sciences Library, and I worked at Rex Hospital Library. But, I haven't worked in libraries since then. And all of my library classes and knowledge is just completely out of my mind at this point. So I should have gone a more technical route. I should have taken a programming class, because I didn't use programming at all when I was working for the consulting group. but Python and R became a more like a bigger deal when I started at Cisco. Thankfully, I still haven't had to learn it, and I don't think that I will at this point. But I think, I took some technical classes at SILS, and I should have just gone the whole way instead of focusing on LS.
I can. So I thought my master's program, there's nothing I would redo as part of that, but I kind of wish, I don't know if it's still in place now, Lori, but there was a program where if you were like a senior, I think, in the undergraduate program, you could do SILS work to expedite your master's.
We still have that.
Okay, yeah. So that's not something I knew about when I was in undergrad, and I wish I had, because if I'd had that knowledge then, I absolutely would have done it, and it would have put me, I don't know, ahead in my career like by 4 or 5 years. So if I could redo anything, that would be what I would do again.
Did you do your undergrad at Carolina?
I did. So I was in the School of Journalism for my undergrad, and I wouldn't do that again.
Yeah, for me personally, I would redo maybe something with my research, but in terms of like coursework and like, the opportunity that I've had to work with people, I wouldn't really change that. Maybe towards the end of my PhD, I felt like perhaps I should have worked a little more with some of the librarians, because I only started like seeing their work as super interesting towards the end when I was writing my dissertation, and then not much early on. So yeah, so that's my take. But otherwise, like I actually had a pretty good time. I wouldn't change much.
That's good to hear. So I want to remind our student guests on the call that if you would like to ask any questions, feel free. You can put something in the chat to everyone. You can put something in the chat directly to me, or you can raise your hand or unmute yourself. We're happy to take questions in a variety of ways. I'm going to keep asking questions, and as things come in, we'll work them in. So in my role as a career services coordinator at SILS, a lot of the questions I get from the IS side of the house is kind of how to break into the field. So when we start talking about networking or about informational interviews, a lot of students get very hesitant about that, and they feel like they're bothering professionals, and they don't really want to appear to be kind of needy and want to talk to people. And I would just love to hear your thoughts on perspective of how to get connected in the field, and what things that would not annoy you if current students did.
I don't think I would be annoyed if anybody contacted me. I know I've done the same thing on the other, like when I was looking for work, I sent out, man, after graduation, it was like 100 applications in the space of 3 months before I found something. So, anything you can do to get your name out there, connecting with people on LinkedIn is fairly impersonal. But talking to people is the way to go. And I'd be happy to talk to anybody who wants to. My career path has been kind of circular. I don't know if you're familiar with the cartoon Family Circus, but every now and then there would be a one of the little kids who, instead of going directly from point A to point B, he just circles everywhere, and then he finally gets to B. And that's kind of how I felt about my career. So I don't know if I would have a whole lot of useful things for people to know about how to go from point A to B, but I could talk about my experience, and I wouldn't have any trouble talking to people about that.
Yeah, same. I really enjoy coaching and mentorship. So, and I'm sure a lot of my peers feel the same. So most of the time, no one's going to be bothered or annoyed if you have questions about how our career trajectories worked, or what we did, or what we wish we could do over again. As far as advice goes, I would say try to maintain relationships with your fellow alumni, because they have a vested interest in the school and you all as well. And if they don't have the career that maybe you want, I'm sure they probably know somebody, and they'd be happy to refer you. Networking doesn't have to be this like thing that you have to become best friends. It can really be as simple as, hey, I'm looking for a job do you know anyone in the field? And most of the time people will be like, yeah, I'll connect you with this person. It's really that easy. I panicked a lot about it in school and there was really no reason to. So.
Yeah, I share the same sentiment as John Mary has. So when people introduce the whole concept of networking to me, I always thought about like, okay, do I have to go to an event, talk to people, and do all, say all these things? That's not how that works. That's not how the game is played. Be intentional, know what you want, figure out who do you want to talk to, and just be nice. Like, and nobody's going to like hate you if you have a nice, good 15-minute conversation. Like what is the worst that will happen? Like you probably won't connect with them again. So have a nice, polite 15-minute conversation with them. Tell them what you want. And if you feel unsure, perhaps just ask them what did they do to get where they are. And, it'll be all right,
Good to hear. How did any of our panelists get started with big data? Was it just through coursework or was there something else that got you into big data at the beginning?
So my work when I was doing PR was less big data, more medium-sized data sets that were very manageable with Excel. So my first like true experience with big data was through coursework. And I worked on a project where we were querying Twitter to pull down like political opinions and tweets and stuff like that. And just having to parse through that and build algorithms to try and narrow stuff down was my real first exposure to it. I do a little bit, I like I mentioned, I do data work now in my job, but again, the data sets are much smaller than what I was doing in coursework. So that was my first experience with it.
I still don't have any experience with big data. It's only medium data up to like, a couple million rows, in a table, which isn't very large. And my experience with it has been, well, the first experience was with the business intelligence consulting group right out of school. And that was data warehousing, data modeling, data visualization. So grabbing data out of a source system, connecting it to related pieces of information, and then building pretty pictures out of it.
Mine was first through coursework. That was the one with Jaime Thought. And then Jaime introduced me to this conference called TREC, which happens in DC inside NIST. NIST is the National Institute of Standards. And so they have these like yearly competitions. So I competed I think towards the last year of my master's and then the first year of my PhD. So those were the 2 times I competed. And those data sets were massive. I had interned like at a search company like later on. And the data that I was like, dabbling with at NIST was like far greater than the data that I was working on at the search company. So that was like a fun experience because I think the next thing was that you could screw it up and you would still be fine. It's basically a sandbox. It's completely okay.
Thank you. Another question that we had was about professional development. Is it important in your field? And if so, what are some examples of ways that you participate?
So in my current,
really, oh yeah.
Mary, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's really big at Cisco, and I don't know if that's unique among companies, but they really push PD at Cisco, and to the extent where they will fund trainings for you and going out and learning, and like these are pretty hefty price tags on things. So very fortunate to work for a company that does that. But in my own time, I try to stay up to date on things as well, just to make my life a little easier at work. And that is not funded. But, at least at Cisco, you're not necessarily punished for not knowing things, but there's a very strong push for people to get outside their comfort zone and to constantly be learning. Sorry, John.
No, it's fine. No, because Mary and I are in slightly different positions at Cisco. She is a permanent employee and I am a contract employee. So I don't have yet. I think, about to ascend to permanent status, but I don't currently have the same benefit for personal development. Anything that I wanted to do to learn on my own is self-funded right now. So I'm sort of waiting until I get the coveted blue badge at Cisco. But overall, it's been an important thing to do. And my career sort of pivoted a little bit into data privacy ops right now. So I have certifications that I'm working on through our system, and then a big overarching certification on privacy law worldwide. And then before that, when I was doing business intelligence work, I didn't really do a lot of personal development. Mostly it was just learning on the job. And if I wanted to get certified on SQL systems or whatever, that would be a thing that I did on my own.
So I just visualize myself, because I'm wondering how much of the personal or professional development you're talking about, how much of that is just updating yourself on different iterations of computer programs. Like now I'm in a seminar called The Organization of Information, et cetera. And, they've given us the charts of entities and how to fold them and relate them and normalize them. And I feel like that's okay, but the money of what's being done, or the real qualification, I have the feeling like when I get out of here, someone's going to say, can you program this in SQL? And they're not going to say, like, can you match our data set over here to this data set over there? I'm wondering, like, on the day-to-day, what are the skills you learned in SILS that are working out for you in your careers, or are you sitting next to people who just learn the program, and that's good? Like, I have a social sciences background, a PhD right now, and I'm just some days I feel like it just doesn't matter. Like if you really want to do something meaningful with data and move it around for people, I'm trying to get the tools, and I'm wondering, how do I focus? What do I focus on?
So
sorry, I don't know if that's too broad or abstract.
Well, you just described how to make a data warehouse, sort of theoretically, which, I didn't learn what that thing was. Well, that's not true. I took Rebecca Vargas' class on special libraries, and there was 1 week on business intelligence. So I sort of knew what it was when I applied for it. But building one on your own, there's so many different ways you can jump after you leave SILS. And so trying to say, well, you should learn this, and you should learn that, and you should do CX, and you should do BI, and there's not enough space in your brain, man.
Yeah, I'm trying to stay open, I guess, is what you're.
I would take the database class. I think there might be 2 of them. There's an introductory, and then there's the second one. I didn't take the second one, so I don't know what's discussed. But it's the basics of setting up tables and doing foreign keys so that they connect to each other, and that would help you out as far as mapping your entities go and your tables. And then if you find that it's interesting, there's a lot of BI, business intelligence positions, even just in RTP, or if you wanted to go somewhere else, that's a growing field. So I could recommend that.
I think a lot of the coursework at SILS, the more technical coursework at least, it sets a pretty good foundation for getting started. It kind of depends on what your goals are as far as getting a job and a career. I mean, if you're going into like if you're trying to go for a senior role, then yeah, you better know how to code back and forth, right? But if you're doing something like more entry level, then chances are all you need is entry level like experience, right? And then the rest of it you learn on the job. This is my experience anyway. It all depends. Sometimes you're going to have a technical test when you go into a job interview, and they're going to see how much you know, and that's going to be the determining factor. So it's really hard to say. I mean, if you have the time to beef up what you learn in class on your own, then absolutely you should, to the best of your ability. But I think most jobs are also aware that you're not going to be necessarily an expert coming in, especially if it's like a new language. You're going to have to learn that on the job as you go a lot of the time. I will say everyone should learn Excel. They don't really teach that at SILS, but you should understand how Excel works back and forth. Like learn how to do index matching and VLOOKUPs and pivot tables and all the basics. That will get you so far, I promise.
I hate Excel so much. I hate it's the worst.
No, it's my favorite program. I love it.
I have actually a related question to that because so I have a background that's kind of like a cross between Paul and Mary's, and I've done communications work, but my background's in the humanities. And I realized that I did not want to do anything that resembled PR, and that's where I was headed. And so what I've been trying to figure out is what SILS is assuming people maybe know already who are coming into information science. And so Excel is a good example of, like, I've used Excel in limited ways. I know, Mary just said it again, but I've realized that this is like something I need to sort of really know in and out to sort of move forward. But I'm wondering if there are other kinds of classes that SILS doesn't necessarily offer that would be really helpful, like introductory statistics, for instance. I know that the PhD students are required to have those statistics courses, but like, where are the gaps in IS? Which, yeah, that's kind of my question. Yeah, not succinct question, but nonetheless, thanks.
I took a stats class through the Carolina Health Informatics program, and because it was required, not because I wanted to learn statistics. And I can say that I've never used statistics in any of my analysis jobs, which is probably pretty bizarre. But I've never had to use statistics. I feel like if I had taken a different stats course, I would have had a better, result. But I was just tortured through that whole thing. Biostat 600. I feel like business knowledge is something that I should have had a better understanding of after grad school, because the job I had was, like I said, the intersection between tech and business and project management. And I didn't know anything about sales or finance or anything like that. So like an accounting class could probably be more useful than stats. It just depends on what you think you might be doing afterwards, because it's really hard to specialize in everything in a 2-year program.
I would say take a stats class. So in the work that I do, it is sort of assumed that you kind of, so I do like a very research role. So in my role, yeah, you naturally have to be good at statistics. But when I have conversations with product managers, and when we start having their data engineers too on the team, we sort of, so for example, it would be like, if there's a number being reported, the questions will be like, what are the confidence intervals? How sure are we that this number is actually good, right? So nobody, so these, like p-values. So these sorts of conversations, they happen so naturally in a dialogue. But each part of those, like, you have to like have some sort of a technical background to understand what is the impact of that. Like if I say this interval is like this, and this number is falling or not, like what does that actually like mean? Like what nobody's going to like sit there and tell you like what that means. So it would be helpful for you to really know that. And yeah, so take an introductory stats class, like, that is something that I felt was something that was lacking in SILS. Because yeah, if you're working on a data job, you're going to be working or having conversations with a bunch of statisticians too, or a bunch of other quant people. And this will just make you feel at ease when you're having conversations with them.
Sandeep, we wanted to make sure we got any input you wanted on the professional development question. Are there any things that you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, so the way that I kind of constantly keep in touch with what is happening is, this is a little bizarre. So I follow like a bunch of Twitter accounts, which talk about new methods, new packages, new code, which keeps coming. So I keep following that. So that's one. I keep reviewing for conferences. So I kind of like keep myself in tabs with like what are the new methods and stuff like that. And I generally don't take a lot of certifications or courses. I pretty much rely on YouTube, Stack Overflow, and a bunch of blogs. That's basically like my go-to to like learn a lot of things. And I know that there are some people who sort of like take it a bit like, why am I watching YouTube videos about all of this? I'll say like, just do it. Like, if that, for me, that works and I do it, I'll do it, Like, for example, like simple stats concepts. Sometimes if I forget or if I am not remembering it, or if I've lost the main concept, I just go to like Khan Academy or something like that on YouTube, and I just, like a 5-minute video, and boom, I'm back.
I know that sometimes students want to make sure that they don't miss anything. And I think it's great to hear from professionals in the field that it's like, you aren't going to be able to have everything covered. And so then how to learn and continuously learn, I think is helpful. Another thing that we find with students is that information science is everywhere. So how do you pick an industry? And is it really T-shaped where it's better to have breadth and some depth, or is it, a different letter shape? So in your experience, have you seen where you want to develop an expertise in a certain vertical or a certain industry, or is it more just your skill sets can fit in and the industry can shift, and that's okay too?
I think
So that's something, sorry.
No, go ahead, Sandeep.
Oh, no, I mean, that is something that I constantly think about. So whenever I want to like apply in a new area, the first thing that I do is try to get at least a basic understanding of that area. So for example, like in my last year of my PhD, I was working with Javed in health informatics. I think my first 2 months were basically like running around and making sure that I understand like what the heck is health informatics. He basically hired me so that I could build a bunch of search engines for him, but I had no idea like what did he mean by health informatics. So sometimes I think skills can be applied in different areas, very straightforward, but there is that domain expertise, which is super important. And there will be instances where you will have to realize and be okay with the fact that you will not gain that domain expertise in a short span of time. And you will have to be very innovative with how you can leverage people who are there in that space, if you're really committed to wanting to work in that space.
I think in general, it's better to have a little bit more depth than breadth when you're trying to break into a career or an industry or a career. But don't focus so hard on what you're doing that you silo yourself and you're not attractive for other positions. I know that for me, like all the jobs I've had at Cisco, which is not many, but 3, it's been because I was good at something that wasn't really my primary focus, that someone pulled me into something else, right? And I got to go try that out. Even if I wasn't an expert in it, they saw potential for me to do that. So have a good core skill set, but be flexible as well, and you'll find something you like, and naturally, I think, want to focus more on that. The other thing I would say, and this is a bit of an unrelated tangent, is when you're looking at jobs and they're listing out qualifications and what they want for the job, that's their dream list of things. It's not what you have to have or what you absolutely need when you're applying. Like, just go ahead and apply. Like, the worst thing that's going to happen is they never contact you. Like, whatever. You don't have to have every single thing on there. Most people aren't. And there's like a joke where, you'll have a language that came out 5 years ago and they're looking for people with 10 years of experience. So it's just, it's whatever, like, just apply, see what happens, be confident, and good things will happen.
I had a whole bunch of thoughts go through my head and now I can't remember any of them. I feel like having a really good understanding of databases is key. And knowing how to connect different tables together to get to the answer that you're looking for, or get to the answer the business person is looking for, and badgering you to find out. When I moved from the consulting company to UNC Health, my understanding of SQL was really important, even though they use business objects instead of straight up SQL queries. And UNC has a really good training program for all of their technical programs for all the electronic health records, and then SAP business objects to help you figure out, how everything works. So that was really nice. And then, yeah, like Mary said, getting pulled into data privacy now, that just happened because I was really good at documenting process and suggesting improvements and I had been working on another team, and they lent me over to data privacy, and data privacy was like, oh, you're really cool, let's hire you on instead. So, you know, your strengths will become the way that you move around in your industry or into other industries.
It's always fun to hear things that I share with students as, you know, unprompted, just out in the wild. And so, you know, the unicorn of the job description is something I share with students all the time, that, you know, they write the core job description and they're like, oh, wouldn't it be nice if, and they start adding in things. And I think Mary's example of 10 years of of a language that's only 5 years old is a great example that, you know, we see in lots of different ways. So maybe it's more of a V instead of a T-shaped thing. So that's always good to know. The other question that comes up a lot with students is navigating the first few weeks, few months of a new position, and seeing what is your role, how much of it is in trying to learn everything, how much of it is being collaborative and finding out new things, and how much of it is kind of staying in your lane, and how do you navigate that for a new environment? So any feedback about that?
You're definitely going to feel useless for a little while, and I still feel useless. When I started in July officially with this new team, and I didn't feel as useless because I'd already been working with them for 9 months, but I still was like just sort of, you know, trying to feel out how everything works and who all these people are and what all these acronyms are, because it's true, everyone likes their TLAs, 3-letter acronyms. Probably something that could help you is setting expectations with your boss and your manager, figuring out what their expectation is for how quickly you're supposed to know what you're doing, because it's going to feel like you're drawing a paycheck for doing nothing for a little while. And they will help connect you to people who can help, people that know the systems that you're going to be working on and can train you, or, you know, classes you can take, and so that you can understand your role better.
The imposter syndrome is real, and it will last for a very long time. And then you'll feel like you got over it. And then one day someone will ask you something and you'll be like, oh crap, I'm a phony all over again. It took me a solid 6 months to feel like I wasn't going to get fired every day because I snuck my way in and they hadn't found me out yet. And then it took like a full year before I really felt like I was good at my job and that everyone could come to me and I would know the answer to something. That is very normal, and they're aware of it. No one's expecting you, well, hopefully no one's expecting you to just hit the ground running on day one. That very rarely is going to be the case. I think setting expectations is great. I wish we had a class on that at SILS, because it can be difficult to know, you know, to keep your boundaries and your personal life separate from work sometimes. But you know, understanding exactly what's expected of you, what's not expected of you, all those things are very important. And the more you advocate for yourself in your job, the better I think it will be for you long term. So
when you start working, right, there are going to be two things which are super important. One is especially I started working when the pandemic hit. So everything for me was virtual, like establishing relationships with my coworkers and everything. So when I look back, there are two things which I thought were super important. One is, how do you design your one-on-one with your manager, your direct manager? So that is super important. You need to figure out like what is the agenda that you will have week after week, so that not only are you able to report to them, but you are also able to see how are you sort of like, you know, progressing week on week. So that's one. The second is, you need to find some sort of a safe space inside the workspace where you are to have normal fun conversations with people. Otherwise everything becomes so robotic and monotonous, and like it doesn't feel like fun anymore. So, you know, the imposter syndrome that Mary was talking about, like that is like super real. Like that is like stuff that I had always thought I never had it, but it's like it'll just come and hit you one day and then you won't even realize it until somebody actually comes and tells you that this is what is happening. So to get out from that, you need to have a safe space and you need to have some sort of a track record to like look back and see what is happening. Otherwise, your brain is going to do, start doing all funny things and you won't have control over it. So you need to figure out some strategies to like cope.
I have an addendum, fake it till you make it is totally a real thing too. The major project I was hired to do when I started with Cisco last year, they didn't tell me that's what they wanted me to do during any of the interviews. And then I started and they're like, okay, now you're going to do this thing that we've never mentioned. And I said, great, I'll totally do that. And then I panicked because I didn't know how to do it. And so, I just figured it out and no one knew. And I apparently did a good job because that's sort of what got me into data privacy. So, don't ever let on that you don't, well, I probably wouldn't go that far. If it's close to what you know how to do, if they're asking for something that you almost know how to do, sort of feel out how much you can say, oh, I don't know how to do this versus I know some of it and I'm going to learn the rest of it while I'm doing it. That's sort of the diplomacy between you and your boss you sort of have to figure out.
Yeah, we certainly talk to students about if you're applying for a job you can already 100% do, you've passed on that job. Like there should always be some percentage of your work that's a stretch. And so John Mark's example that it was literally the day one, that works too. But being able to be comfortable asking questions and then figuring out how to incorporate that feedback with what you already know. I think that sometimes students will feel like they don't know as much as they really do. And so to try and balance that with being open to learning new things. You also don't want to come across like, I know everything, you can't stump me, this will be easy. Not the best approach. So certainly there's time for a few more questions, but I'm going to throw one out in case people want to start typing. We've talked a lot about the preparation side in graduate school, and we've talked a lot about in the role. Can we have a question about interviewing and what kind of connected for you in your interviews? Star stories are very exciting, and well, maybe I think they're more exciting than everybody else, but the idea of taking a nugget of information about yourself and presenting that in an interview can be helpful. And so that acronym, more than it's a 4 acronym, is situation, task, action, and result, where you can kind of consolidate your experience into a data point. So were there things in your interviews, or how technical were your interviews to help get the point across that you did have the competency to do well in the position?
And I hate thinking about the interview process because it's just such a pain in the ass. One thing, so there was a job that I went for at Epic Games in Cary, and they make Fortnite and Unreal Tournament and other popular things. And it was a technical, analyst role. They had a technical test where they would say they had the example of 3 different tables, and you had to figure out, how to link them together to answer a question. And I'd been doing that anyway for my job. So I wrote out a very elegant solution, and they were like, wow, that's the best anyone's ever done on this. And I was so proud of myself and didn't get the job. So, there's a lot of variables that can go into it, but I would say, I've lost my train of thought. If there's, usually they'll tell you if there's a technical test and what it might entail, like if it's a programming thing or a database thing or something else. And then you just rely on your experience before. If it's something that you've never done before, then just be straight up front about it and be like, I haven't done this before. Is there another way that you would find acceptable to test my knowledge?
I think when you go into interview, even before you go into interview, when you're building your resume, be sure that you're putting numbers down for everything you're doing. So demonstrate whatever change you've put into place, how many projects you did, what the effect was. You have to be very precise, because that's what we're delivering in our jobs every day. It's how effective were we? And it's not like, I think I did a really good job. It's like, no, you have to prove it with numbers, right? So incorporate that into your resume. One, it'll get you noticed, but two, when you go into interview, it sounds a lot more impressive than, fluffier language about how something went really well. So that's probably my biggest piece of advice getting into the interview. And then when you're in there, make sure you know what's on your resume. So don't fib or stretch truths. And two, research whatever company or organization you're applying to. You need to know what their mission is. You need to know who their C-level suite is. You need to understand some basic projects that they're working on. It demonstrates that you've gone just a little bit, extra to learn about the company, and they do remember that. If you show up and you're like, yeah, I just want this job, they're gonna be like, okay, you and 200 other people, like, who cares? So you have to do a little prep work, but once you get in there, if you know what you're talking about and you can demonstrate that you've done your research, that's gonna put you ahead of like 90% of people right off the bat.
I'm
Also,
happy to.
I totally bombed my technical interview and it was fine. So just throwing that out there.
I'm interrupting Sandeep. I'm sorry. If anybody wants to see a copy of my resume, I'm happy to share. I'll send it to Lori and she can distribute it. Just to see how things are formatted and all that fun stuff. There's classes on this stuff and you can hire people and whatever. I've gone through probably 5 or 6 different format iterations of this thing.
My interviews were very technical, so which meant that I had to basically do a lot of programming. And for that, there are actually a couple of websites where you can just go and practice. One website, it's called LeetCode. Almost anybody who does any kind of coding these days does something on LeetCode to get better at it. And so just practice a lot. Once you're on that website and you keep practicing, you'll just get good at it. The next, are you able to hear me now?
I heard you say leap code, and then the next tip was cut out. But I caught leap code, which is invaluable. But the next point after that was.
Yeah, so I'm saying like practice a lot on LeetCode. So that's like, yeah, like everybody that I know who does any kind of technical job, they use that website to practice. So that's one. The next thing is, for a lot of the non-technical stuff, right? I have seen a lot of people thinking about just going in there and winging it. Absolutely do not do that. Absolutely do not do that. You almost always will do research about that position and that company where you want to interview. So when you start doing that, you will start developing a mental model on the things that you want to communicate to them. Write it down. Write it down. Think about how you would want to communicate over there. Because these are very, very good points that you probably will not get like, impromptu when you're talking with somebody. So do that. And I think, so basically this is what I think happens during interviews. We go into this some sort of like an auto mode, and then because you can't, do a lot of decisions, things just start happening. And for that process to work for you, you have to have practiced a lot. So practice a lot of coding, practice all the main points that you want to say people. Because if you're going to sit like in an interview for like a day-long interview, which is going to be like 5-6 hours, you will not have the mental capacity to sit and think through everything that you want to say. So it's like, like playing chess. The top players in chess, the first 6-7 moves, they're not going to sit there and think. They just happen as reflexes. So some answers have to be like that for you so that you save energy to the parts where you have to actually think.
An addendum to that, if you're someone who struggles with your soft skills, so speaking to people, communicating ideas very clearly, those skills that aren't technical, definitely work on those. And it will sound stupid, but the best way for me to do that was to have my peers do mock interviews with me. And it's almost good that I felt really stupid doing it, because it really prepared me for the actual interviews. Because if you can talk to your friend and not laugh about what you're doing, that's actually going to translate into a more confident persona when you get into the interview. So practice with like some of the more common questions that you can expect to get, and know your answers so that, you're not trying to think of everything off the fly. Because like Sandeep said, if you're not prepared, they're going to be able to tell. And the person who comes across as more confident is probably going to have the lasting impression compared to everyone else, regardless of skills. So.
Great feedback. Thank you very much. Well, seeing no further questions, I want to take this time to thank our panelists. Would it be okay if students want your contact information in the future, if they want to reach out to you? Is that okay for me to share? Wonderful. Thank you very much. We'll make sure to do that. So thank you again for joining us. We really appreciate your time and your advice tonight, and it's very helpful for our SILS students. So I'm going to stop the recording now.
Thanks so much, everyone.